John Bessire, and welcome to the TV show John's World. Today we're at the Moffett Field History Museum, and today our host is going to be Bernie McDonald. He's going to be talking about the museum and the exhibits, and I hope you enjoy the show.
This is a model of the Macon. The USS Macon was a rigid airship the Navy had here in the early 30s. It was an airship 785 feet long and carried 6.5 million cubic feet of helium. The Macon could reach speeds of 80 miles an hour, had a crew of about 80 to 85, and was built as a scout to go out over the ocean looking for enemy fleets or ships. The idea was to use the airplanes on board. It carried 4 airplanes on board that could be used to extend the eyes of the ship. Actually, the Macon could fly along at 80 miles an hour, and the aircraft would go out at about 165 miles an hour, fly out and then fly back, and then fly out and fly back as they proceeded down a track to examine the ocean. And that way they could cover over 100,000 square miles of ocean in 12 to 15 hours. And it was an incredible achievement as far as being able to see things. They traveled, they operated about 2,800 feet and could look out on beyond the horizon, probably had a view of 40 miles, something like that. And that way they could cover a lot of ocean very quickly. Normal cruisers on the surface could do about 30 miles an hour, and of course their visibility was limited to what they could see from about 125 feet, something like that. So it was quite a forward jump. Unfortunately, the Macon, well, let me tell you something about the aircraft. The aircraft here were used to extend the vision of the Macon. There were 4 of them carried on board. They were carried up in a hangar up inside there, and they could be dropped down, released, launched. They'd go out, do their patrols, come back around, fly back up onto the trapeze. The trapeze would then lift them up inside. They could be refueled, crews could change, and then they could be dropped down again. They'd fly off, do their patrols, come back around, and come on same way. They had a little spot back here called the perch, and they could actually rest on there while the trapeze was full, and so that gave them a lot of flexibility there. The Macon had 8 engines. They were German Maybach engines, about 560 horsepower, and the propellers could be turned 90 degrees. If you can see this here, they could go forward. They could stop those engines, reverse them, back down, or they could turn them 90 degrees so they're going almost like a helicopter. They could pull themselves down, or they could pull themselves up. In order to maintain their ballast when they were flying along and burning off their fuel, they took the exhaust from these engines and ran them up through condensers, removed the water from the exhaust, took it back on board and stored it on board, and they could maintain the weight of the vehicle while they were burning their fuel. They had a range of anywhere from 7,500 to, in some cases, 10,000 miles, depending on the speed that they were traveling. So it gave them, they were unique. They're probably the longest. They were the longest range aircraft in the world at that time. And of course, this was in the late 20s and early 30s, before World War II. This is a picture of Admiral Moffett, and of course, the field was named after Moffett. Admiral Moffett was killed on the Akron, was lost on the Akron in 1933. And he was considered kind of one of the early fathers of naval aviation, and did a lot of work toward developing aircraft for the Navy, carriers, and of course the lighter-than-air program also. After the Macon was lost in 1935, the Navy had no further use for this air station, which was only 2 years old. So they decided to worked with the Army Air Corps, and they traded this base off for some property down in San Diego, which was called Rockwell Field, and that was developed into the North Island Naval Air Station down there. So the Army then came in here in 1935 and was here till 1942, and they had some pursuit aircraft in here. They had some observation airplanes, and they had later a large West Coast training base here. And they were here until 1942. Now